Still calling your congressman? Waiting on hold? Hoping someone took your message?
Thank you for calling.
There's a better way to do this. The Maha Legislative Tracker lets you browse every Maha bill. Pick the ones that matter to you and send a letter to your rep with a single click. Search federal, by state, or by the issues you care about most. Take 60 seconds and make it count. Your voice can make America healthy again at mahaaction.org.
There was a time when the news delivered truth,
It still seems like a dream.
when integrity was paramount,
I cannot contend that I have always been right or wise.
and trusted voices guided a nation.
How do you measure such an astonishing moment?
Today, the headlines are blurred, the signal lost in the noise of corporate agendas and paid narratives.
Vocal anti-vaxxer.
Deranged lies.
It is humiliating.
What happened to the truth? It hasn't disappeared. It's simply moved. The Maha Report brings you unfiltered, independent journalism covering the issues of the Make America Healthy Again movement. Rediscover the facts and reclaim the truth. Subscribe now at themahareport.com.
Welcome to the Maha Media Hub, and welcome to the Maha Revolution. I'm Tony Lyons, president of Maha Action. Today, I want to tell you a story that I know better than anyone else, because I lived it. It's the story of a book a whole lot of powerful people did everything in their power to make sure you would never read. That book is The Real Anthony Fauci. Let me start with the man himself, Dr. Fauci, in his own words. Over the weekend, Senator Rand Paul released more than 1,000 of Anthony Fauci's diary entries, and you'd think a man at the center of the deadliest health crisis in a century would focus on things like the lives lost, the families destroyed, the decisions that were keeping him up at night. But that's not what's in there. On a day in the spring of 2020, with global deaths mounting and Americans terrified, here's what Dr. Fauci wrote and what he felt was worth writing down. Big front page article about me appeared in the Washington Post, he wrote. Very flattering. It's not hyperbole to say that today I'm the most famous person in the world, talked about everywhere, and I'm one of the most recognizable people in the world. He bragged that the entire Secret Service Corps was coming over to chat him up, waving him through the gate without even checking his ID. He kept a running tally, not of the dead, but of his television hits, proudly logging that he'd done all 5 Sunday morning shows in a single morning. Pure vanity. Secretary Kennedy put it best this week. He said, "The starkest impression you get reading these diaries is the massive dichotomy between what Fauci was saying privately behind closed doors or in his journal and what he was saying publicly about where COVID really came from and how deadly it actually was, and how well those vaccines really worked." And it goes higher than that. Senator Rand Paul and others believe the record shows that Fauci, along with Deborah Birx, didn't just mislead the American people, they misled the President of the United States himself. And this isn't just history. Today, Anthony Fauci finally had to sit in front of Senator Rand Paul and the rest of his committee, Paul as the chairman, and answer for the things that he did. This is the same man someone on Joe Biden's staff preemptively pardoned hours before he left the White House. You don't hand out a blanket pardon to a man who has nothing to hide. Predictably, Anthony Fauci pleaded the fifth, something like 111 times, and refused to answer a single question. And here's why all of this matters today. Those diaries confirm, point for point, exactly what Bobby Kennedy wrote. This was never a story about honest scientific disagreement. It was about one man using the power of government to enforce orthodoxy and crush dissent. Anybody who didn't give complete blind faith to the so-called experts got marginalized, vilified, demonized, and censored. Kennedy lived it himself. He pointed out that COVID almost certainly came from the Wuhan lab. And what happened next? Instagram erased him. Millions of his followers gone overnight for so-called misinformation. And that's the identical playbook that they ran against the real Anthony Fauci. But it didn't work. The book sold 1.4 million copies, despite epic, really epic censorship, shadow banning, and bookstores and libraries across the country refusing to carry it. So let me take you back. Bobby Kennedy came to me with a manuscript he poured his life into, 16 hours a day, sometimes 20 hours a day, 7 days a week for the better part of a year. And it's the most meticulously researched book I've ever seen. 2,194 citations, vetted by doctors and scientists and lawyers, carrying a blurb from a Nobel Prize-winning virologist who we were on the phone with multiple times. So, Bobby was a Kennedy. He is a Kennedy. He's a man who could have had an easy life. But he risked everything, not for money, not for power, not for fame, but to tell the American people that the most powerful health official, the person who was telling them what to do with their children and their entire families, with everything in their lives, this man was not who they were told he was. And I published this book because I could see where this country was heading. Suddenly, there was only one acceptable answer to every question. The government, a handful of big corporations, and Dr. Fauci wanted to control everything, what we thought, what we read, and what we put into our bodies. They demanded blind faith and authority. And blind faith is not science. Real science is skepticism, curiosity, the freedom to question anything. But instead of debating anyone who dared to ask a question, they shamed them and punished them, deplatformed them, delicensed doctors, doxed, defunded, and gaslit them. They built a disinformation dozen and publicized it everywhere and went after the people one by one. And when it came to Bobby Kennedy, they set out to destroy his reputation, his family, lie about his record, and paper the country with hit pieces. They used words like anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist, and dangerous. And these were big pharma talking points used by captured government agencies meant to shut down the conversation before it even started. We as in the Maha movement, don't ostracize people or different perspectives. We welcome disagreement and we let the marketplace of ideas decide what's true. And when it comes to books should be dangerous, disturbing, uncomfortable, thought-provoking. And at the beginning of COVID, when we were bombarded with propaganda from every direction, the real Anthony Fauci was exactly the kind of book this country needed. But what happened next? There was a total media blackout. The best-selling book in America, and not one review in a single major newspaper. Nobody would interview Bobby about it. When we tried to buy an ad, and understand, newspapers normally chase me down begging for ad dollars. The New York Times turned us away. They ran it by a division that I had never heard of in 27 years of publishing. And it was called, and I'm actually, just want you to know that I'm not making this up. It's called Standards Management. And Standards Management decided that the book and a blurb from a Nobel Prize winner was misinformation. So they wouldn't take the ad. And it didn't stop there. YouTube took down a videotape book signing. Amazon shadow banned the book. Twitter refused to promote it. Chain stores kept it invisible, buried in the stacks, in the back of the store, and you couldn't get it from anyone there. They didn't know if they had a copy. While every other bestseller was stacked to the rafters, just hundreds of copies. Independent bookstores around the country refused to carry it or even take special orders for it. And the New York Times bestseller list ranked it number 7 in a week when it outsold every book in the country, 92,000 copies, behind, their very own 1619 project, which sold thousands and thousands of copies less. And Dr. Fauci at the moment was arguably the most powerful man on earth, making the rules for the entire planet, telling every one of us whether we could work, whether we could eat at a restaurant or send our kids to school. So he could have walked onto any network and brought with him any expert he wanted. So why was he so afraid to sit across from Bobby Kennedy and debate him? Why not go through those citations and tell us which ones were false? Why not sue the publishing company? The answer is, when you have the facts on your side, you can argue. When you don't, you censor, you deplatform. Dialogue is how you build trust. Censorship is what happens, when you're afraid of a fair fight. Here's the part that they never understood. It didn't work. It wasn't going to work. It never works. We put together a team and we went on every radio show, every podcast, every program that would have us on, dawn to dusk, and the book just caught fire. When Americans see something's being banned, scrubbed off YouTube, refused by the Times, they think, what are they trying to hide from us? What are they afraid of me seeing? Every act of censorship became an advertisement for the book. In the middle of this, all of this, the New York Times ran a big, bold editorial warning that America has a free speech problem, that Americans were losing the right to speak their minds without being shamed or shunned. The most powerful censor in the country, really in the world, was lecturing the rest of us about censorship. This was just 1984 incarnate. But here's the good news. The man they tried to silence during COVID, before COVID, and after COVID, is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And the book they tried to bury sold over 1 million copies. And the accountability they spent years running from is finally coming. Reading that book was once called an act of rebellion. And that rebellion won. On today's shows, we're featuring some of the heroes who helped fact-check the real Anthony Fauci, the doctors, lawyers, researchers, and scientists who spent months reading and researching. We'll be joined by Mary Holland. She's a lawyer. She's the CEO of Children's Health Defense. And then we're joined by physician and medical freedom activist, Dr. Meryl Nass, biostatistician and epidemiologist, Dr. Martin Kulldorff, Dr. Stephanie Seneff, senior research scientist at MIT. Really impressive people. And you'll hear from other free speech warriors like Sayer G., best-selling author John Leake, and Congressman John James of Michigan. First up, we'll hear from Mary Holland. And, Mary Holland, like I've said, she's just been an incredible warrior for free speech, for COVID justice, for children's health. Just, really an impressive human being. And we're just so proud to have her on with us today. But first, we're going to have a short clip from Bobby's first interview with Steve Bannon.
I haven't seen him ever cite one fact that you say that's wrong. I'm yet to see that fact.
They cannot point to any fact wrong. And this book is 240,000 words. It has 2,200 footnotes. If there were factual errors in there, they would be coming after me. If they can even find small ones. Now, they're going to be able to find one or two, because you can't write a book this big without making a mistake. But we fact-checked it.
Welcome, Mary.
Yeah. Welcome, Mary Holland.
Thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. So I'm very proud to have worked with Bobby Kennedy at Children's Health Defense on that book, and with you, Tony, at Skyhorse Publishing. And as you've said, that book was groundbreaking, and not only was censored, but it was one that many people at Children's Health Defense worked on for the research. And then we had a team of fact checkers. And really, Bobby Kennedy comes out of the tradition in law schools where every citation in an article must be fact checked. It has to be absolutely correct in context. And as you've said, they basically have never found anything wrong with it, or otherwise they would have sued Bobby Kennedy for defamation or for any of the other possible claims against him. So I was very privileged today to be in the hearing room where Dr. Fauci sort of not testified. I'm not sure you would say untestified. And I want to just read to you what he said about 111 times. he started with an opening statement, and that's an issue, because he both gave an opening statement saying that this was essentially a witch hunt, that this was Rand Paul's obsession, that this was only an effort to embarrass and intimidate him. But then he went on to respond to every question by saying, on the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based on my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. And he would repeat that every single time as a mantra. But there was a brilliant opening statement by Senator Rand Paul where he really went through, very calm, very sober, very deliberate, all of the things that Dr. Fauci had done, and compared it, as you did, Tony, to the completely different narrative in Dr. Fauci's diaries that were completely self-centered, that were incredibly narcissistic, and seemed to and completely contradicted what he was saying to the public. And Senator Paul showed a clip about that as well. And the Republican senators who were there focused on different elements of what Dr. Fauci has done. And in particular, Senator Hawley pointed out that Dr. Fauci had about 8 different federal staff members solicit cash prizes for Dr. Fauci to win individually. One of those prizes was $900,000. That was really fascinating. And Senator Hawley kind of provoked Dr. Fauci, well, what's the color of your tie? What's the color of the carpet? What day is it today? To which on every question, Dr. Fauci answered on the advice of counsel, blah, 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 the Fifth Amendment. Senator Hawley also pointed out that because Dr. Fauci had made an opening statement, he may not have a privilege, and he has a pardon from President Biden, he may not have a privilege against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment. And he cited to an 1896 Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Walker, which candidly I haven't gone to review, but I'm looking forward to doing that. But all of the senators, Senator Ron Johnson was very impassioned in what he talked about. Senator Joni Ernst, Senator Ashley Moody, who had been the Attorney General in Florida, who talked about all that they had done in Florida to try to overcome these terrible decisions about the mandates and the distancing and the testing and the, as Senator Johnson called them, the experimental gene therapy shots. So it was great to be in the room. One of the saddest parts, Tony, was that really the Democratic senators did not engage with the substance at all. They really deflected. They flattered Dr. Fauci. They said we shouldn't be looking backwards. We should only be looking forwards, which really suggested this huge chasm in the reality that Americans are still dealing with about the travesty that was the COVID era. But what was really encouraging is that the hearing happened because of the dogged work of Senator Rand Paul and Senator Johnson and some of the others. And I believe this is just the beginning. This is just the start of a true COVID reckoning that will happen. As I waited online this morning to get into the hearing room, I met with parents of young people who died. I met with people who'd lost their spouses. People are not going to stop paying attention to this. They're not going to give up on this. And I do believe that we're at the beginning of a new era in accountability for what happened during COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. And, to me, you're just like Bobby Kennedy. You're a folk hero who was right all along and who was fighting all along. And I remember so clearly our late night phone calls, at 2 a.m, thinking through, how are we going to get this book out? How are we going to get it done? How are we going to reconcile all of these hundreds and hundreds of people who were part of the vetting process? And many of the time people disagreed because that's what real science is. There's not one sort of monolithic answer. There are a lot of different perspectives. So you were so instrumental in all of that. And, when the Democrats say things like, we need to move on, we should remember words like these incredible words. And that is, those who forget the past are destined to repeat it. And we know that's true. That if we don't have a reconciliation, and a COVID moment where the people who suffered, one of the pieces of data that I learned just today is that in Japan, 87% of people who claim COVID injury get compensated for it. In Thailand, it's 82%. Even in Canada, it's 22%. And guess what it is in America? Less than 1%. So we need a moment to sort of reconcile what's happened, to make sure that it never happens again, and to get compensation and to give, compensation for the people who were harmed and credit for the people like you who worked so hard to alert the public of what was going on. So thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Tony.
Next up, we have Martin Kulldorff. And Martin is a biostatistician and epidemiologist with more than 200 peer-reviewed publications. And he's known for his work on disease surveillance, vaccine safety monitoring, and statistical methods for detecting outbreaks. He currently serves as the HHS Chief Science Officer at the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation. So he's one of those brave scientists like Mary Holland who spoke out during COVID, and really stood up to the most powerful people on the planet when he co-authored the Great Barrington Declaration. Ultimately, he was fired from Mass General. He lost his job at Harvard when he refused to take the COVID shot. So he's one of the great heroes of the COVID era, and one of my great heroes right now still. Martin, welcome, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I was asked to talk about 5 lies during the pandemic, and there were more than 5, but if I could change only one thing with the pandemic, it would be the closure of the schools. That was a huge injustice to our children, and we owe to our kids to make up for that. So that's number one. And we know from, for example, Sweden that didn't close the schools for kids aged 1 to 15, that there were no mortality there during that first wave. So we knew in the summer of 2020 that it was safe to open schools. There was no benefit, only harm from that. And we know also now that Sweden, who didn't lock down, had the lowest excess mortality among the Western countries. Second, masks. We had randomized trials, one from Denmark and one from Bangladesh, that showed that masks had 0 or minuscule efficacy. And it's then dangerous to tell people to wear masks that they are safe, because if you have an old person who is sensitive and at high risk, they were told, wear a mask, you go to the restaurant, they wear a mask, and you'll be safe. Well, they were not. They needed to be careful whether they wear a mask or not. So telling people they were safe by wearing a mask actually killed people. So that's the second big lie. The third big lie is 2,500 years ago, during the Athenian plague, we knew that there is natural infection and acquired immunity. But suddenly during COVID, that was forgotten. And people who already had COVID were mandated to get vaccines, even though they already had superior immunity. So that was a huge lie at the scale of claiming that the Earth is flat, which we also have known about for about 2,500 years. A fourth lie is about Anthony Fauci. He was claimed to be the infectious disease expert and the science, but he is a lab scientist. He does not have understanding of public health. And those are two very different things, knowing how things operate in the body versus how things spreads in communities and in the world. But there will always be individuals who claim to know things which they don't. So the bigger disappointment is actually the media, who just went along with it and put him on a pedestal and refused to hear any alternative views from other scientists. So that's, and they are still at it, the media, with that. For example, a few months ago, when the acting CDC director, Jay Bhattacharya, decided not to publish a paper with a flawed statistical method called the test negative design, it became an international news story, which is completely bizarre. because obviously you shouldn't publish papers with flawed statistical methods. The fifth big lie was that there was consensus in the scientific community for the pandemic measures. They were not. When I talked privately with colleagues, most were appalled and against those measures, but they were afraid to speak up because of what happened to those of us who did speak up. And those things are still going on. There are many scientists who are afraid to speak up about things because the scientific leadership in journal editors and university presidents, they still have power over scientists. So that's the fifth big lie, that there was scientific consensus about the pandemic measures. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Martin. And, thank you for all the work that you've done and that you're still doing. And, for exposing the lies, for never quitting. When the New York Times wrote that Sweden was endangering all their children, many people in this country thought that was true. And now, we see clearly that Sweden did so much better, like you said. And so I'm just grateful that you survived all this censorship, all the lies, all the propaganda, and that you're back in a position where you can really do a lot of good, where you can really help public health in this country. Because there have been so many people in positions of power in this country who haven't cared at all, whether children suffer, whether people really have a decent chance of having a healthy life. So thank you again for living through it all, and for rising once again to be in this position where you can help.
Well, thank you.
Next up, we have Steve Bannon, and he's the brilliant and relentless and fearless political strategist, host of Steve Bannon's War Room. And, like Bobby Kennedy, he's been called dangerous just time after time. And he's even been called the most dangerous political operative in America. He's a former Navy officer, so he's pretty tough. And he was an investment banker. But above all, he's an unapologetic patriot and a fierce defender of free speech. And, we're going to show a quick clip here because he was the first one to interview Bobby Kennedy. So brave at the moment because, hundreds and hundreds of shows that we pitched wouldn't have Bobby on. But Steve Bannon, of course, he had him on and did just a great, great show. So here's a clip from that.
Why did all of the liberal democracies in the world pivot suddenly and have the same militarized and monetized reaction to the pandemic rather than having a public health response? And I show in my book how this was drilled year after year after year by a group of either pharmaceutical companies, by the social media companies, by the intelligence agencies, and by the medical technocracy, led by Tony Fauci.
Welcome back, Steve Bannon. Great to have you on.
Thanks, Tony. I appreciate it. I want to announce today, too, I've hired Tony as my new agent. So thank you for the kind words, sir.
Anytime.
Not deserved. Look, I just want to say a few things, and because I know you got other great speakers on. I hope today reiterated the responsibility we have, the duty we have to this, to our country, to our fellow citizens, to future generations, and really to the world about this apparatus that has grown up in how, because it's not simply Fauci is a very evil individual and Fauci is a megalomania and Fauci is a narcissist. Fauci is all that. But as Bobby Kennedy's book showed, The Real Anthony Fauci, and then in all the reporting that everybody did, this is a systemic problem, and it hasn't gone away. As soon as we lose political power, if this is ever, as soon as it's taken over by the opposition, we're going to be in the exact same shape. as much work as Bobby and others have done in this administration, we really haven't dismantled, particularly what Bobby says is so haunting, the militarized and monetized system, big pharma and their factotums in these government, not just the American government, governments throughout the world. We've only scratched the surface of taking this apart, of this deconstruction of the administrative state, or in this case, to take on and take a blowtorch to the deep state. So I hope today is a call to arms and re-energizes people of what our challenge is. I take pride in the fact that we shifted our show. We started War Room Impeachment the day, or basically in October of 19, when Nancy Pelosi started to get serious about the impeaching President Trump. And everybody in D.C. kind of blew me off that there was just Nancy Pelosi blowing steam. It wasn't going to happen. I go, no, you're absolutely dead wrong there. In mid-January, so 4 months later, because of my understanding of China, the Chinese Communist Party, and what was happening in Wuhan, we shifted the name of half of the show to on 20 January to War Room Pandemic. We were the first for months of people taking this thing seriously because we knew the militarized nature of what was coming out of Wuhan, the Wuhan lab particularly, which has been a center of PLA, medicine and bioweapons in the bioweapon industry. It's like the Fort Detrick of China. And just to see the lies and misrepresentations done, the first time we reported on Fauci is when Peter Navarro called me. They'd had a huge fight in the Situation Room on the 23rd of January, where Tony Fauci was absolutely, he said, spreading lies and disinformation from the very first meeting. This was about quarantining folks that were coming back from China, of which President Trump did, but only after Anthony Fauci made this huge fight that it didn't need to be done and nothing was going to be spread and it wasn't a problem. And he was getting over worried about it. This is the first days of it, or at least the first days became relevant in the United States. Also, I drilled down and found out, which we still haven't gotten, I think, out clearly enough, how Anthony Fauci, after Obama's National Security Council, remember, Obama's National Security Council put a hold on all gain-of-function research because they saw things coming out of the University of Maryland and what was happening down the University of North Carolina that concerned the people on Obama's National Security Council. It was Fauci that very sneakily and cunningly went after the original HHS, head stepped down. He slipped over to the White House and got the thing changed. But we have a serious systemic problem. We have to take care of that. That's our duty. And it's not going to happen in the next couple of months. It's not going to happen in the next couple of years, but we must redouble our efforts. And this is why MAHA and MAGA are so important. And we continue to fight together, not just through this midterm. And I think you're starting to see President Trump's looking around going, hey, Bobby, how come you're not doing more on these vaccines? And we're sitting there going, what? The pollsters told you that was terrible and we had to shut it down because suburban moms didn't like it, which is absolutely the opposite of the truth. So for all of our colleagues out there in the MAHA movement, the War Room platform is available, and I'm more fighting mad than ever after the day. Remember, the War Room, as big as it is, and we're still banned on virtually every platform. Why are we banned on it? It was for Tony Fauci. I'm the first guy to go after Tony Fauci. And in going after Tony Fauci, we were banned by Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all of them. Every national platform we were taken off of. And still the show not just survived and grew. Why? Because people realize you can go get real information. And if you look at everything we reported, all the guests we had on it, particularly that first interview with Bobby Kennedy, would just like shock the audience. Because, as you know, a lot of conservatives and right-wingers didn't really know much about Bobby at the time, just what they've been spoon-fed by the corporate media. And they loved this guy from the beginning. You know why they loved him? Because he's authentic, he's a fighter, and he's brilliant. And that's a pretty good combination. And that book, we sold hundreds of, I think the book sold 1.5 million copies with no support in the New York Times Fighting. I think we sold 400 copies. It's the reason Tony and I did a deal for War Room Books, because our audience couldn't get enough of it. And as you know, that book was like the phone book, right? It was like the phone book. People couldn't get enough of it, and they read it, and they want to have Bobby back on. They had chat groups about it, all of it. My point, we still have a massive, massive, massive mission in front of us, and we have to accomplish it. If we don't accomplish this mission of taking down this apparatus, I don't think anything else is going to matter, because this apparatus at the end will make us basically nothing more than Russian serfs. So, Tony, thank you so much. And thank you for introducing me to everybody. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's a great point, though, that the battle never ends. But, many of the problems haven't been solved. And we saw that with Fauci today, that so many of the Democrats coming out and saying, let's put this in the past, let's move forward. And we know we can't move forward till we solve some of these problems. And, it kind of makes me think of this quote from the book, The Plague by Camus. And he writes, "It could only be the record of what had to be done and what undoubtedly would have to be done again by all those who, while unable to be saints, but refusing to bow down to pestilence, strive their utmost to be healers." And I think you've really been a healer, because you question everything time after time. You're on the front lines questioning everything before anyone else does. And that's why you were willing to have Bobby Kennedy on. You're fearless, just not afraid of anybody. And Bobby came on, and it helped launch a movement where millions and millions of people knew that they'd been lied to, they'd been propagandized, and that what was happening had to stop. And now it has stopped, and now many of those people are in positions of power.
I came at this as
Thank you, Steve.
When we shifted the pandemic, real quick, I came with a blank slate, but I'm a pretty quick learner. But it was after reading Bobby's book and after those calls, I became the biggest advocate for Bobby Kennedy being President Trump's vice president, because of his fearlessness and his truthfulness and his brilliance and his authenticity and the fact he won't back down. And I think that all of us have to gird ourselves. We should replay in the quiet of the night. Everybody in this audience should just replay that Fauci, all of it. Because I can tell you, I had mainstream media people blowing my phone up today. They are freaked out that happened today, that this happened. And so this is a huge advantage for us. But every person in the Maha movement, every person in the MAGA movement, I think has, in the quiet of the night, just watched the entire thing from beginning to end, and what Fauci did and what he refused to answer. And that, I think, will gird our loins for future battle.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you, Tony. Thank the audience for everything. All you guys work in the Maha movement. You guys are great.
Next up, we have Stephanie Seneff. And, like many of the other people, she's just incredibly accomplished. She's a senior research scientist at MIT. And, she's focused on the role of toxic chemicals and micronutrient deficiencies in health and disease. And she's authored over 50 peer-reviewed journal articles on all of these kinds of topics. And her book on glyphosate, titled Toxic Legacy, was chosen by Kirkus as one of the best nonfiction books of 2021. And I think it was the best nonfiction book of 2021. So she was a vocal critic of the COVID vaccine and of the dubious science that led to it being green lighted. And just, great to have you here with us, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm very honored to be here. And I want to say that I knew about Fauci even before COVID because of Judy Mikovits's work. And I had read her books. So I knew he had a despicable character already then. And then, of course, I read R.K. Jr.'s book as soon as it came out. So I'm well aware of Fauci's behavior. It was the whole COVID nightmare was just, I couldn't believe it was happening as it unfolded. And it kept getting worse and worse. And I just couldn't understand what was going on. I was very confused about the virus itself, back in the beginning when they were trying to figure out, was it lab origin? Was it from the wet market? And Fauci was saying, oh, yeah, it's wet market. It's natural. And meanwhile, all the other evidence pointed to the fact that it was a lab origin. And then, of course, I learned about the gain of function issue. And Fauci was funding the lab in Wuhan. And then I was like, what are they doing there? What is the purpose of this research? And, is it biowarfare? Is it are they trying to develop a vaccine? And actually, I had a chance to meet with Professor Luc Montagnier in Germany. And he told me that he suspected they were trying to develop an AIDS vaccine by inserting AIDS peptides into the genome of the coronavirus. and use that as a vaccine. Now, I don't know if that's true. I still don't know. That was his thoughts. Whether it's trying to develop a vaccine or whatever, but gain of function research was not supposed to happen. Why are we funding China, who presumably is our enemy? None of it made any sense to me, and it still doesn't. And then, of course, once I heard about warp speed, Trump came up with this idea: we're going to supercharge the development of mRNA technology. It's going to be wonderful. We're going to roll this vaccine out, very fast. Should take 12 years. It's a brand new technology. A lot is unknown still about the mRNA technology. It has incredibly complicated effects on the body, and I've published probably a dozen papers, close to a dozen papers, in collaboration with many people, including Peter McCullough, Mark Mead, and Anthony Kyriakopoulos, Laszlo Boros, important recent paper that we published together. All of these papers, and Greg Nye. So Greg Nye was actually the first paper I published in the spring, right after the vaccine was released. As soon as I learned about it, I started reading about it, and I knew I didn't want the vaccine even before it came out. I knew I wasn't going to get it. And I never dreamed that I would be required, I would be mandated to get it as on staff at MIT. I was really, really shocked to realize that I might have to quit my job. And fortunately, I crafted a religious exemption request, and they granted it. And so I'm still working for MIT, and I'm very grateful to them for doing that. But I could not imagine back then that it would ever come to the point where I would be forced to take this vaccine or quit my job. And, and then to think of all the other people and the kids, especially the small children, because it's insane to give that vaccine to the kids. That vaccine is there's still a lot that's unknown about it. And its mechanisms of toxicity are absolutely fascinating and devastating. And I've written many papers, and they're deep science, and we're looking at all these different angles. For example, prion disease. Luc Montagnier thinks that it causes Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which is a human form of mad cow. And he had 26 patients that he looked at. All of them developed symptoms within a month of the second vaccine. Most of them were dead within the year, a very aggressive form of CJD. And so, so I'm very concerned about the brain. It's been shown, it's showing up. The spike protein is still showing up in the brain of people who suffered from hemorrhage. There's a recent paper on that. And of course, there's the heart problem. It's just, and I looked at VAERS database, and they just had, I am familiar with VAERS because I had done a lot of analysis and published papers looking at the VAERS data before COVID. Once COVID came out, that totally took over the database. Most of the reports were for COVID. And when I did the calculations, if you normalize for the number of vaccines that were delivered, 27 times as many reports for COVID compared to the flu vaccine. So it's clearly much, much more toxic than the flu vaccine, and people are dying from it, from the vaccine itself. Greg and I published the paper called Worse Than Disease, ? As the title. We were saying, is it in fact the case that you might be better off to get the disease than to get the vaccine? And we're seeing now the vaccine causes innate immune suppression, so that you're more susceptible to everything, including COVID. And so we're getting people, it only lasts for a few months, whereas if you get natural infection, you get a durable, long-term safety. And so it's much, much safer to just get the disease than it is to risk this vaccine and then get the disease anyway, because the vaccine doesn't actually protect you. It doesn't protect you from spreading. So, it's a real nightmare, that vaccine. It needs to be removed from the market. The mRNA particles themselves are toxic even without any cargo. And that's a paper that I've just published together with a couple of very smart people. It's just come out, and I hope you'll look for that. And it talks about LDMD, lipid nanoparticle-driven membrane dysfunction. Very interesting topic. I learned a lot from these two co-authors who are really brilliant. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephanie. And, thanks for your bravery, your relentless pursuit of the truth. You're just such a great role model for doctors and scientists and researchers, because people just aren't like you. You're such just a rare person who's done such impressive work. And I just feel very grateful. And there are a few thousand people watching this, and it's a great group of people. And I hope all those people will post your story and will encourage people to sort of research you and see what you've done. And then thanks for bringing up Judy Mikovits, because she's also one of the great heroes of the COVID era. who's really been, to a great extent, unsung. And her book, Plague of Corruption, was a #1 New York Times bestseller during COVID. And that book was censored, and she was deplatformed and ostracized and treated badly by so many people, even though she was right about so many things. So we'll definitely have her on, and thanks for bringing her back to top of mind. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Dr. Meryl Nass, and she's a board-certified internal medicine physician at MIT. She's a biological warfare epidemiologist who specialized in bioterrorism prevention, investigation, and medical response. Dr. Nass has provided 6 congressional testimonies on topics such as bioterrorism and vaccine safety. Meryl, thanks for coming back on.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be back. So let me talk about Fauci. Fauci said he joined the NIH in order to avoid getting drafted and going to Vietnam, and that it was his only choice. And yet by age 44, he was head of the NIAID, very ambitious man, and he remained there for 38 years, becoming an absolute expert in bureaucratic maneuvering and gaining influence and control over other people. Both the infectious disease scientists who he gave grants to, and also officials within many of the other federal agencies. His MO was always transactional. He rewarded people, and he expected others who he had rewarded to do what he wanted, and if they didn't, they would be in hot water. For instance, Rochelle Walensky's husband, when he 4 months after he started a company, he got a $5 million grant from Fauci with a promise of $12 million more if he met certain guidelines later. And this was several months before she was named head of CDC, but it meant that, and Fauci pushed for her, meant that she would be able to be controlled by him. That's just one example. The Gates Foundation gave the NIH Foundation over about $500 million. And during COVID, Fauci had bi-weekly calls with Bill Gates. And federal research funds appear to have been directed to areas of interest for Bill Gates. Now, the year Fauci joined NIH, Congress allowed, the year he became NIAID head, Congress allowed federal scientists and their agencies to collect royalties for the first time from private companies that licensed their patents. These are discoveries that were made on the taxpayers' dime. Now, between 2009 and 2021, Fauci's agency, NIAID, received over $325 million in royalties. Don't know what that is. Sorry. And in 2022, he received $400 million, his agency, from Moderna alone. Now, Fauci was legally allowed to use this money as he pleased. There was no requirement that he needed to report to Congress what was going on. Basically, he had turned NIAID into a farmer incubator. He sent his nurse wife to graduate school to get a PhD in ethics so she could approve his questionable research projects. He justified gain-of-function research to turn bird flu into a transmissible disease in ferrets, which are used as the closest model to humans, a very dangerous, everyone agrees, very dangerous type of research, but he paid for it at 2 different institutions. He was an accomplished liar. He pushed for school closures, for instance, but denied it. He pushed the 6-foot distancing, but later admitted there was absolutely no science to support it. What he did to hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin was, in my view, a crime against humanity, where both drugs have a very wonderful safety profile, and yet he created fake science and shut down 2 clinical trials that he had promised to run at the very beginning for hydroxychloroquine, when the drug apparently started to look like it was really helpful. he ignored evidence that other people had developed, and he used fraud to push remdesivir. He packed the NIH guidelines committee with people who were financially entangled with Gilead, the maker of remdesivir, which is why remdesivir has been used on hundreds of thousands of Americans with very little, if any, benefit and lots of harm. His entire career as head of NIH, head of NIAID, the agency was funding Ralph Baric to do coronavirus research to the tune of $189 million cumulatively, and we don't know why there was such an interest in coronaviruses for all that time, when all they did for much of it was cause a cold. He was the midwife for the proximal origins paper. I mean, you can spend hours talking about all the terrible things this man did. He spent over $40 billion fiddling around with HIV and AIDS, never came up with a vaccine or a curative drug. How he managed to remain in place for so long is he kissed up and he kicked down, and hopefully now he will finally get his comeuppance. And I thank you.
Thanks, Meryl. And, Fauci's connection to big pharma companies, to dangerous gain of research companies, I mean, it's all just so incredibly troubling. And he's proven himself to be a fake, to be a fraud, to be a liar. And it was really Dr. Fauci, not Bobby Kennedy, not you, not Mary Holland, not any of the other people on this show who really was dangerous. And that danger led him to harm more people in this country, more children in this country than I think anybody in the history of the United States. And he hasn't really paid the price for that yet. Like you said, for 38 years, he failed his way to the top, where by every measure, health got worse, and yet he got more and more power. So children got more and more sick. The country as a whole, everybody got more and more sick. And yet he got more and more fame and more power, and he gloated in his diary over that fame and power. So just shocking, but great to have you on. Great to have somebody with integrity who calls him out, who calls it right, who tells the truth. So thank you for coming on again, and hope to have you on many, many times. Next up, we have Sayer G, and he is a proud member of the Disinformation Dozen, right alongside Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he's the chairman of the Global Wellness Forum and the founder of Green Med Info. And he's one of the toughest and most steadfast Maha warriors out there. And he's joining us to discuss all the different censorship tactics, many of which started in the UK, that have been used to suppress inconvenient or costly truths, costly to a handful of big companies. And many of these methods, many of these tactics are things that he has suffered as a result of, and he's really experienced it as much as anybody has. So thanks, Sayer. Thanks for fighting. Thanks for sticking with it, and thanks for being such a great champion of the Maha movement.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony, as always. And it's quite interesting. I'm actually speaking from London here today, which is actually where the NGO we all know of now, the Center for Countering Digital Hate, began their campaign to silence Americans in a way that was very theatrical. You named 12 individuals who claimed that they have the most egregious platforms when literally tens of millions of Americans, knew in their heart and soul, and absolutely from the perspective of even basic science, that you can't force mRNA jabs on people without informed consent. So those who questioned the dominant narrative, they didn't have the luxury of Fauci today, who took the fifth, which is actually a good thing. He has due process, he has representation. It's a really wonderful thing that, our democracy works. But when it comes to those Americans who spoke up, they were treated as criminals, and they weren't given the type of adjudication we would expect, right, where you're innocent till proven guilty. They were actually told that they didn't have a right to know what the actual consequences of those interventions were. Our government laundered censorship by using NGOs, the media, academia, in order to violate our basic constitutional, medical, and human right to know whether or not something has risks and benefits, what the science is. It's not some, brand. It's not some concept of, as Fauci would say, I am the science, or, basically just trust it as if it were a faith. And I think that most Americans, and globally those who watched, woke up to the fact that this is a priesthood, that conventional medicine practices scientism-based medicine. It's not evidence-based, it's eminence-based, based on engineered trust in authorities that are supposed to be looking out for our best interests. And when you really think about what happened, when you deprive someone of that fundamental information, you cannot make an informed medical choice, and therefore you are violating the Nuremberg Code of Medical Ethics. So the irony is that platforms like my own, greenmedinfo.com, which hosts 10,000 topics, one of which is on vaccines, some of the research on safety and efficacy issues you will not see reported elsewhere. We had literally 100,000 studies on the benefits of natural interventions, and they decided to label us as far right. So that was actually in 2020. And even in the Epstein files, there's actually a memo from the Gates Foundation that discusses alternative health practitioners as a target for basically exactly what they deployed 10 years later, which was the Disinfo Dozen campaign. So the threat to pharma and the threat to a governance system that is based on really the biosecurity model, or global governance as permanent pandemics, which we still see some vestiges of even today, that horrific vision is actually what I think most Americans woke up to. When you're protecting your child or your own body, that no one's supposed to penetrate you without consent, right? We know that in the case of human relations, that's called rape. Okay, when it comes to the medical model, people were so inculcated with the belief that the medical establishment was always thinking about their best interest. And ultimately, those of us who knew long ago, having been vaccine injured or seen the devastation wrought upon literally millions of Americans and children, being gaslit into thinking that autism is not caused by vaccines, for example. We woke up to that fact, and it was actually a very beautiful moment in history. So, ultimately, what we all saw was the end of, our republic as far as constitutional rights are concerned and our vision of democracy, when the veils lifted and we were able to see that our government still does use this laundering mechanism. So I'm actually very hopeful. I feel like there's been a lot of progress. The fact that Bobby is now HHS secretary was not in the playbook. They meant to decapitate us, defame us publicly, and then really just intimidate others into not acting. The same playbook that was done in the Middle Ages. You would have a theatrical guillotine, someone would be pilloried. It didn't work. Fundamentally, it backfired, and they woke up, I'd say 100 times more people than, Tony, you and I, being in the trenches 20 years ago. There were very few of us, right? Now we have literally 100 times more people that are aware of the importance of health freedom, making yourself and your loved ones healthy, advocating for clean air, clean soil, clean water, clean everything. That's how we recapture our health. And I think that's the true gift of what we all experience. So I come from the perspective of victory, of a sense that there is such a beautiful future in store for us if we all continue at the level of our micro decisions to just make the right choice. Eat good food, detoxify, don't fall prey to the propaganda, even when it's coming from your own government. And if it is, use the grassroots, lobby, do the things we're doing here today. It's a beautiful opportunity as an American to feel like we actually can move forward in a more beautiful model of health, of wellness, of connection, of truth, of beauty. Those are the things that keep us going. So once again, it's such an honor to be here. I'm so proud of the MAHA movement. It has had global effects. There are people all around the world that want a piece of this, and they can have it. And that's the good news.
Thanks, Sarah. It's so great to see you so positive and so eloquent, when, just like so many of the other warriors who come on this show, you've been vilified, censored, deplatformed, prosecuted, just punished in every way for the great things that you've done. And so I want everybody watching this to really recognize who Sayer Ji is, to follow him on every platform that he's on, to help him in any way that you can, to read his books, to just, feast on Sayer Ji, because you are a great man, Sayer, and I'm proud to be your friend. And I know that you're going through a lot, and it's just beautiful to see and to know that you'll never, ever quit. And, we all have your back. We're with you, and we're grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Tony. You're a great friend, a great hero. And with your leadership, I have no doubt that we are going to see this movement become stronger and more successful than ever.
Thanks, Sayer. Next up, we have John Leake, and he's an investigative author, journalist, a speaker known for exploring public health, medical freedom, regulatory accountability, and he's the best-selling author with Peter McCullough of The Courage to Face COVID-19, and has written extensively on all things COVID-19 and things about the pandemic, about government policy, government accountability, scientific transparency. And, more than anything, he encourages critical thinking and careful examination of all the facts that are out there. In his book, Mind Viruses, you really get to think about how it could be that we develop irrational obsessions and the people, events, and interests that lead to a lack of logic succeeding for some period of time. And one such period, as we all know, was the COVID response period. But John, it's great to have you on.
Thanks, Tony. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for mentioning my book, published by Tony Lyons at Skyhorse. So thanks for doing that. I think that the Fauci era was a sort of model of this collective loss of rationality that we saw, where we're suddenly told in the midst of this climate of fear, and I think fear is always the underlying circumstance in which such mind viruses are incubated and unleashed on the public. We're terrified. We're told that there's this virus that's emanating from Wuhan, China. We know from Anthony Fauci's email correspondence with his virologist friends, Christian Andersen, Professor Gary at Tulane, Eddie Holmes at the University of Sydney, that they immediately suspected in late January, early February, when the genome was published, that this did not come about through natural evolution. They're actually stating it in an email thread that they apparently did not think would be subpoenaed. But then when it came to making a public pronouncement at the beginning of March, they published their paper, The Proximal Origin of SARS-CoV-2, and they say in their public statement the exact opposite of all of the concerns and suspicions that they had expressed in their private email chain with Dr. Fauci. So I think that the documentary evidence is clear that the reality of the situation and any kind of rational response that should have been prompted by the reality of the situation was completely thrown out. So that raises the question, two questions. Why was there this systemic dismissal of reality, even though it was being ascertained in February of 2020? Why is reality being tossed out in favor of this imposition of orthodoxy. I mean, when Anthony Fauci says infamously, "I am science," he's in effect proclaiming something like papal infallibility. He's science incarnate, and anybody that questions him is something along the lines of a heretic. I mean, this is pre-Enlightenment thinking. Any reasonable adult who has possession of his faculties, who's not overwhelmed by fear and propaganda, can see the absurdity of this. And yet, this is what we were stuck with. The other thing that I wanted to say, and this is really the main point of what I would like to say here today, I am a great admirer of Senators Paul and Johnson. I've met both of the men personally. I think they've done a great job. But it seems to me that the documentary evidence of Anthony Fauci's malfeasance is so great that he really should be referred to the Justice Department for criminal prosecution. And I want to emphasize this. I'm not going out on a limb with this. The documentary evidence of multiple acts of fraud, fraudulent concealment, and what I would even say rises to the evidentiary standard of mass negligent homicide with his suppression of well-known FDA-approved off-label treatments and his promotion of remdesivir, which even the WHO issued a warning saying, this is not safe, especially in a hospital setting where the patient is having extreme stress on the kidneys. Even the WHO didn't recommend remdesivir. So I think the evidence is available for a criminal prosecution. And on that note, the one document that I really, if I achieve nothing else with my little talk today, what I would draw everybody's attention to is a 2002 paper published in Frontiers of Virology. That was the February 21st, 2022 issue of Frontiers in Virology. It's a very prominent virology journal. The title of the paper is MSH3 Homology and Potential Recombination Link to SARS-CoV-2 Furin Cleavage Site. You can easily find this on my Substack with Peter McCullough, the focal points I just published on this. All the links are there. The long and short of it is a specific nucleotide sequence that codes for the infamous furin cleavage site that was later discovered in SARS-CoV-2 after the Chinese published the genome. That particular nucleotide sequence, it's a 19 nucleotide sequence that overlaps the 12 nucleotide sequence of the furin cleavage site. Moderna in Cambridge, Massachusetts, patented that 19 nucleotide sequence in 2016. Moderna then teamed up with Anthony Fauci's NIAID to produce the first messenger RNA vaccine against this pathogen. Now, the odds of that happening by any sort of standard statistical analysis are about 1 in 3 trillion that happened through random chance in nature. This is the smoking gun. This is the evidence that links the lab creation of SARS-CoV-2 with the purported vaccine countermeasure. You have the same complex making both. So I would urge, and I hope people will share this, Attorney General Todd Blanche should consider strongly all of this documentary evidence for criminal prosecution of Anthony Fauci. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks so much, John. And as all of you watching can see, John is a really smart guy. And his book, Mind Viruses, is just a fantastic and important book. And I hope all of you will read it and will think it through. It's just such a critical book for this historical moment. Thanks, John. Great to have you on again. So now we're going to shift gears a bit and we're going to focus a bit on politics. So next up, we have Representative John James, and he's a U.S. representative for Michigan's 10th Congressional District. He's a West Point graduate and a former combat aviation fighter. He's running as a Republican for governor of Michigan. Welcome, John James.
Hey, Tony, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. The MAHA movement is extremely important to me, which is the reason why I'm incorporating a number of tenets as I'm running for governor to help make Michigan healthy again. The way to increase quality of life and the way to decrease cost of living is to have healthier Michiganders. This is something I believe very strongly in and something that I haven't wasted any time doing something about. I'm very proud that I was able to support my friend Anna Paulina Luna's amendment to the most recent Farm Bill to remove protections from organizations that shielded pesticide producers from liability. When you have so many younger people with increases in cancer all over the nation, I believe we deserve the right to understand what's going on, and those who have been afflicted have a right to defend themselves. But before that, we need to make sure that we're addressing the issues so that we don't have to rely on the sick care cartels to keep us healthy and safe. I also believe very strongly in patients-deserving price tags. That's increasing transparency to hold the insurance companies and the hospitals and the pharmaceutical companies and the PBMs accountable for their cartel-like behavior. I'm leading that effort in Congress, in the House of Representatives, and I'm going to be taking that to Michigan because I believe that you cannot have accountability without transparency. And when you give the people the resources to control their own health care and their own decisions, then it's going to have better outcomes for everyone. I believe very strongly in making Michigan healthy again, and this comes from, frankly, my own lived experiences. My wife had cat scratch fever, Bartonella as a result, and there are tick-borne illnesses in our families. Ticks have gotten absolutely crazy and out of control. And as a result, my children also have tick-borne illnesses, Lyme disease as well. We didn't know this until after my wife did extensive amounts of research and recognized that symptoms like asthma, ADHD, restlessness, anxiety, GI issues were all attributable to tick-borne illnesses. And not until we went to an integrative health specialist did we learn exactly what had been going on. And then continuing to do research, we recognized that it was the things that were in our environment that were making us sicker. How much more so are these issues afflicting the rest of society? As governor of the state of Michigan, we're going to be increasing access to testing and resources because even if you test, there are some tests that would give you false negatives. And again, when you look at other areas that may be under-resourced, socioeconomically depressed areas, whether rural or urban, needing the resources to be more healthy, we need to do everything we can to have more clean food, reducing exposure to things like synthetic dyes and PFAS and pesticides and other harmful chemicals. And it's adding insult to injury in places like Michigan, where you can look across the Detroit River and see Canada, a place where they're selling the same McDonald's food, but it would be illegal to sell in Canada what we sell in Detroit. Yes, because they have rules around what qualifies as food. By working with our farmers and supporting through voluntary, restorative, regenerative agricultural practice that improves soil health, protects water quality, and strengthens local food production, these are things that we can do to increase health outcomes by watching what we're putting into our bodies as well. Making Michigan healthy again also includes not just our physical health, but our emotional and our mental health as well. I plan on working very, very closely with community mental health, making sure they have the resource to combat the mental health and addiction crises that we're facing as a nation. And as a combat veteran myself, I understand very well the unseen wounds of war that so many have succumbed to, not just our veterans, but also family members and loved ones who have issues of addiction and mental health that our hospitals, that our schools, and that our jails weren't designed to handle. So again, taking a comprehensive approach, an integrative approach, a community-based approach to make our healthcare system affordable again, putting prevention first, and making sure that we're listening to our experiences, listening to the people, what we're putting into our bodies, and holding the sick care cartels accountable for what they're putting into the food system will be just a start for how Michigan will address this. And when we make it happen, and when we make it better, and we make it work in a state like Michigan, then we can definitely take this as a platform to leverage to the rest of the country. So thank you for your time. God bless, and let's make Michigan healthy again.
thank you so much, John. That was just great. That's it's the perfect Maha speech, and just right on target. And it's very, very clear that your goal to lower cost, expand access to healthcare, protect informed consent, improve food quality, reduce toxic exposure, rebuild long-term health. I mean, all of those things are just so in line with everything that the Maha movement stands for. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So once again, John James really champions lowering costs, expanding access to healthcare, protecting informed consent, improving food quality, reducing toxic exposure, like I said, rebuilding long-term health, and strengthening domestic pharmaceutical manufacturing to protect us in times of war or other natural disasters. So we at Maha Action are therefore proud to endorse John James for governor of Michigan. I think he'd make a great Maha governor. He supported the Maha movement in Congress by voting to remove pesticide liability shields from the Farm Bill, by backing restrictions to prevent foreign adversaries from purchasing American agricultural land, and advancing healthcare transparency. So because the time for the Maha movement, the Maha change is right now, we need to elect members of Congress, but also, we need to elect governors all around the country who are really in line with the Maha movement. And this is certainly one of those cases. So then the next endorsement is, we're really proud to endorse Catalina Lauf, who's running for Congress in Florida's 19th district. She's a former Trump administration commerce official. And, she's a business person who built a children's natural health and nutrition company from the ground up. And then we're also excited to endorse Austin Rogers, who's running for Congress in Florida's 2nd congressional district. And he's made children's health and transparency a pillar of his campaign. And he's emphasized that parents, not bureaucrats, should make decisions about children's health care. And he's been pushing for greater transparency about food and the chemical ingredients that they have in them. So Maha Action believes that both of these candidates will work in Congress to make sure that every American has the opportunity to be healthy once again. Thanks so much. So just want to thank all of you for coming once again. I think this is our 29th Maha Media Hub. And I'm just going to give a couple of stats here. So the Maha report on Substack, which I hope all of you will follow and read carefully, now has over 250,000 followers. Then we've got the incredible Maha Institute roundtables. These have just been great events, mixing, researchers, people from inside government, business people. These are great events, really well planned and really, thought provoking. So I hope all of you will learn about them, think about them, attend them when you can. Then we've got the historic Maha Summit on September 29th, and we're going to be telling you more and more details there. And we've got the tracker of all the legislation that's going on that's connected to Maha, and that's on our website. We've got Maha films, Maha books, Maha parties. We've got a very large mailing list, something like 2 million people. So after this show, you're going to get an email with clips from the show and with calls to action. And we hope that you'll read that carefully, that you'll repost clips, and that you'll continue to work with us to make this movement more and more powerful. Because I think that even though newspapers will tell you that we're failing, that we disagree, that this is the end of something, the truth is that they do that because we're succeeding, because we're doing so well. And we think that the Maha movement can transform this country and that we can get our health back. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next Wednesday at 4 p.m.
America's children are sick, and moms have been betrayed. The time for empty promises long past. Now is a time for action. MAHA is the most powerful force of collective action in generations. The grassroots power of moms and activists has created an army of health warriors with more reach than all mainstream media combined. Together, we can end the chronic disease epidemic. MAHA's influence is reaching millions. It's reaching Congress. And that energy, these chain reactions, are working.
How about Operation Stork Speed?
Dozens of food companies removing toxic ingredients.
I plan to lead by example.
MAHA is now.
We're talking about how to change the culture.
The American people want America healthy again.
It is a renaissance moment in health in America.
For health, freedom, and the truth. Join us at MAHA Action.